Hello and welcome. Today we've got 𝐒𝐚𝐲. I'm very honored to have 𝐒𝐚𝐲 today. We're going to be discussing about many interesting topics, a little bit about his background and also the current situation with Trump, the military, etc., etc. Juan, thank you so much for joining me. Just to ask you, how are you and how's your day going today?
Well, I'm having a pretty good day, and I apologize. There's a lot of traffic in town here today, and I've got a little bit of background noise. And as long as your folks will put up with a little bit, I don't think it'll be too bad. But it's a lot of festivities going on. I'm right on the main drag here. I'm in a town called Fredericksburg, Texas. And so I guess a bunch of Germans came over here 175 years ago, and they built a small town, and it's actually a very beautiful place. And Jim Caviezel, the actor from The Passion of the Christ and Count of Monte Cristo, he and I are on a kind of a Blues Brothers trip across America right now.
Okay. Nice.
I actually picked him up at a monastery. And we're on a cruise across the country right now together, so we're having a little bit of fun.
So I've been listening to you a few times in the past, and I remember once you saying that you are somebody who advises the governments worldwide. And I wanted to ask you, I understand that, there are reasons why we have to, undisclose and protect our identity, especially in a time like this where, there's, the deep state trying to attack us. And I wanted to ask you, because you sound like a very significant person. Are you someone in the back doors helping taking the deep state down as part of the sting operation? Are you part of this?
Well, let me answer it maybe a little different than what your precise question is. I've had a very eclectic life career, and I have a lot of friends that are in prominent positions across the world, industry, government, etc. And those are all, friendly relationships. Some of the work that I did a couple of decades back and more was very, used the word significant. Yeah, it was significant. It was not in a normal government capacity, even though it was in service to my own government, and assisted people that were in prominent positions in other governments and in industry. So I just happen to have a lot of friends that are in the right places that are trying to do important stuff. And, some of them are people that I would probably readily disagree with, but at least they'll listen to my opinion or insights, and I'll try to put it in a proper context to get them to think again. I had that conversation here a few days ago with someone that was dealing with an issue in the Mideast, and I was able to walk him through a prior event and some of the players that were involved, and give him a context to rethink next moves and why, we might be getting baited into something. He certainly is in a position to influence what happens next, and I was in a position to influence him. So, having the right friends, if you're a person in power, a lot of the difference between a right decision and a wrong decision is your counselors, people that can talk with you, and if you can make it make sense for them. And so, I have the luxury, the opportunity, the blessing to be able to have some friends that are in pretty prominent positions and get their ear at some critical moments. It doesn't mean that I'm the decision maker, and it doesn't mean that they always listen. or act exactly as I say, but maybe some blended thing happens where it pushes them a little more one way or the other, and I'll try to make it make sense for them. It doesn't mean I'm right all the time. Sometimes there's stuff going on that you just can't fully know from any particular direction, and so through a glass darkly, as Plato would say. This is a tough moment. The whole world is sitting here with bated breath, waiting to see what's going to happen next. And this question you mentioned with this current administration, let me just jump to the chase for people that may be wondering. Some people have seen that Lynn Wood, the president's attorney back during the campaign, he made a very audacious, to many anyway, statement earlier this week in South Carolina in Myrtle Beach to a group. And he said that the nuclear forces in the United States military are not answering to President Biden. There is a secret to communicate with President Trump, and in case of need for some type of a nuclear response, the nuclear forces would not go to Biden; they would go to President Trump. And that's interesting and it's important. But because you've listened to somebody say, many of your listeners have, tuned in on shows that I've done. I've been saying that for many, many, many long months. And the reason is because while a corrupt Congress...
Juan, I can't hear you. You're going in and out now.
Oh, there we go. Did I come back? Did I come in? Am I back there?
I can hear you, but I can't see your screen.
Have you got me now? All right.
I can hear you, but it's weak.
Well,
I can hear you good.
Let's see if it gets reconnected here. Okay, good. I apologize. That was a call that came in and it screwed us up. So it was no great drama. It was just somebody called and screwed up this call, and I apologize on that.
Mm-hmm.
So the issue is that a corrupt Congress certified that Joe Biden won the election and wouldn't look at all sorts of data that was coming in showing that there was a interference, foreign interference, in fact, in the election tabulation, primarily with the Dominion vote machines and with a lot of fake ballots that were not real ballots. They were counterfeit. Mm-hmm. And so the courts also here in the U.S., the Supreme Court and lower courts, they never actually looked at that data. What they did was they said the people who were bringing challenges were not people that had standing. They didn't have a legal basis for challenging the vote. And so on the actual material, the actual frauds, the real evidence was never seen in a court of law within the context of some decision. The only thing they saw was whether or not people had a right to even challenge the vote at all, whether they had standing. Right. At the moment that Joe Biden was sworn as president, and not a moment before, at the moment that he was sworn as president, that's when the military was required to hand over the keys to the nuclear arsenal to Joe Biden, what we commonly call the briefcase, the football. And that football is literally only just a handshake agreement. There are generals who are in charge of the nuclear arsenal for the United States and beyond. There's other stuff besides nuclear that's perhaps even more foreboding. And so those forces are housed in facilities around the country. The most commonly known is the NORAD facility in Cheyenne Mountain in Wyoming. And that's a base that's essentially about a mile underground inside a mountain, and would be very difficult to hit with an attack from a nuclear arsenal, etc. And that football communicates with these nuclear forces, the generals in charge of those. It's really just a handshake agreement. If there was information, for example, we have satellites that detect the heat signatures of anything lifting off, a rocket, a missile lifting off on the surface of the Earth. They see it, and by the temperature of the flame that the rocket sees, it can detect, aluminized rocket propellant, etc. And so it can tell that this is a rocket, not just a flare, not just a firework or something like that, or an oil rig fire. It can tell by the temperature that it's actually, say, a missile. So within a few moments, the satellite has observed it, made a calculation, has begun to determine a trajectory that, say, a sub-launched missile has. That information is relayed back to North American facility there, the NORAD facility. And then a decision is made. Is this a threat? Where's it going? What could be, who could be the source of the target? Generals are on point 24 hours a day. If, in fact, it's determined that this is an active threat against U.S. forces or U.S. territory or an ally, then a communication would instantly be established with the president via that football, who would be advised, and then based on various protocols that are played out over and over and over, an action plan would be recommended to the president. The president would then agree with it. He would, a general would say, this is what we're recommending we have to do in this situation. We have this long missiles in flight, it's 18 minutes to target, 8 minutes to target, 2 minutes to target, whatever. And then the president would have a period of time to react. And he would have to verify who he is. There would be verification code, biometrics, etc. It would only take a few moments. That agreement is made. And what it does is it gives the general who actually pushes the button, orders it pushed, essentially a legal basis for having proceeded with that decision. Because in theory, here in America, we have elected representatives of the people. And those elected representatives take these types of actions. Our military doesn't act unilaterally in starting a war, responding to a war, etc. In an ideal situation, it's a civilian commander that makes those decisions to take us to war, to defend ourselves, etc. And so that can be violated, though, if the president cannot be reached, or if the president is considered to be under the influence of or blackmailed by or something else, if that general has some kind of knowledge of that. So, for example, let's say that one of the president's children has been taken captive somewhere, and now he can't be considered to be making a decision for the people. He's making a decision for his own personal best interests, his own family best interests, because he's under some type of blackmail or duress. The general that's actually in the command center can override or ignore a command from the president if it's believed that, some agent of another government or a mobster is standing there and has him at gunpoint, or maybe the president's disabled by, literally a disease, or let's just say in some sci-fi sense, he's been cloned. And the general believes that this is not the true actual president that's giving this command decision. In this remote location in the bunker, he can override or bypass that decision because seconds make all the difference. He can, if the president says launch, and most people think, well, it's just a decision to launch. the president, we have a protocol here in the United States that was put in place by Bill Clinton. And it says that we will absorb a first strike from an enemy. We will allow it to go all the way to the target and absorb it, and then we'll respond. And our response may be anywhere from minutes to days. And the reason is because, as accurate as these nuclear missiles are, we believe our facilities are hardened enough that we would take that hit, verify who actually did the launch, and respond with more precision and more directly, as opposed to just being on a hair trigger. And like the movies Fail Safe and Dr. Strangelove and things like that. By the way, a great movie. If Peter Sellers is playing a British liaison operating on a U.S. base, you folks and us, we cooperate and have been for a very long time. So, we're joined at the hip. We're all in this together.
Absolutely.
So
right.
At the end of the day, though, and I hope this explanation is helping some of your listeners. I'm just trying to clarify it for them. So let me just finish this up real quick. So the long and short of it is that all the football is, nothing actually technically happens when the president responds at the football, pushes the button or whatever. It's actually in a remote facility that handshake agreement. Yes, this is what we recommend. The president, yes, this is what we do. No, whatever. And then that general makes a decision and does it. And if there's any kind of question of duress or, validity to the order on legal basis, et cetera, that general has to make that decision alone or in the band of other generals in their communications network, because seconds may matter. And of course, back in the earlier days, we didn't actually have a missile intercept capability. Now with SDI, which is the Strategic Defense Initiative that President Reagan began, we do have some capacity to respond to a missile attack. The least known and understood being the aerial spraying that puts material in the air that people complain about. It's a bit serious. It's just sandpaper dust, but it allows us to do things that electrify the atmosphere and make it very hard for these intercontinental ballistic missiles coming in at high Mach numbers to penetrate the upper atmosphere. Makes it like it's a brick wall. It jiggles the material at a very high rate of speed. That's why in this current phase over the last decade, there's been this push to hypersonic missiles that are a bit tougher on the nose cones. They're traveling at relatively high speed in the upper atmosphere, but not as fast as missiles going out into space and then returning. The Mach numbers are lower and they're less susceptible to this SDI technology. And they can also be steered so that they can avoid intercepts. And so it's still very fast. It's just not as fast as intercontinental ballistic missiles going outside the atmosphere. And the definition of a missile is a guided munition, whereas a rocket is just on a trajectory. You launch it, it's aimed a certain way, the fuel gets expended, and it coasts the rest of the way in. When you have a missile, the idea is that you can have some ability to maneuver it. And then in the current era, this last 50 years, we have missiles that break up. The warhead breaks up into multiple little missiles, and each one of those can go to an independent target. So it goes up as one huge package up into space. Before it begins its reentry, it breaks up into, say, 20 smaller missiles, and they each go a different direction. And now, instead of just dealing with one missile to blow it up, you got a whole bunch of them. You got to track it and intercept if that's the plan. with an SDI type thing, you're just doing things very rapidly, jiggling the atmosphere exactly where those missiles are coming in, heating it up, etc., and making a barrier, if you will, a canopy in those places. It's not the same, just for the sake of people that are wondering, as these low altitude missiles that you're seeing, say, in Israel right now, and the Patriot type defense systems where they're sending up a intercept missile and blowing it up in proximity. Those missiles aren't going that high in the atmosphere. They're not coming down that fast. It's a different type of an intercept than, say, something going intercontinental. So I hope all that helps your listeners. And then just to finalize it up, the contention is, even from what Joe or what Lynn just said the other day, and the things that I've been saying to your listeners through other broadcasts all along, is that we are at a moment where the military, according to U.S. law and the way that the military code is written, the military doesn't take any part in the civilian election process. When the electoral system was engaged and the votes took place and were counted and registered and certified by Congress and the courts, that is all on the civilian side or the executive side of the government. We have three branches of government: the executive office, which is the president, and the judicial system, Justice Department. The judicial side, which is the courts with the Supreme Court, determining law, etc., and then the Congress. So the courts, the Congress, and the executive or president's authorities is this three legs of government that govern America, and the executive branch is the president. Where people don't understand what's going on, it's not clear to them, especially if you're outside the U.S., but even here in the U.S., a lot of people don't really understand how their government works. The president is then recognized as the commander-in-chief of all military forces. So he wears a different hat. Besides the executive, he wears the hat of commander-in-chief. Now, that is technically a separate role. The executive president handles administrative function. He handles laws and the way that the country is adjudicated, if you will, and can go to executive orders where he makes a unilateral decision that something has to be done very quickly. There's not time or not a entry point, say, for a congressional action. An emergency exists. So he will issue an executive order because there's some type of urgency, immediate threat, need for action, and he can do that. Beyond that, though, from the executive side of the president's role, as commander-in-chief, he administers U.S. military forces and is recognized by those forces as their commander, the top general, if you will. In a crisis, the idea being that maybe you can't get to Congress, maybe the country's incapacitated, there's some type of threat, and there's no time for a Congress to dither and wring their hands over what to do, because days, seconds, minutes might be all that you have. So the commander-in-chief of U.S. military forces is a very important, completely separate role. At the moment that Joe Biden was sworn as president of the United States in an election that was certified by Congress and the courts, a crooked Congress and a corrupt courts, captured, blackmailed courts, went along with this fraudulent election process, and it was fraudulent. And we have the data on that. We know that's the case. And stuff that's happening, for example, in Maricopa County in Arizona is showing that, beyond comprehension. It was very crooked. So the military, at the instant that they were required to hand the keys over, symbolically, if you will, the briefcase, the authority for control of nuclear forces, at that moment, suspecting and it was based on the Director of National Intelligence report. One other detail, let me just add this because it'll help your listeners. There was an executive order that President Trump signed in 2018. And the executive order said that in all federal elections, federal being the whole United States, not just a state or a county, city election, in all federal elections where federal offices were being voted on, the Director of National Intelligence, which runs all of the intelligence agencies here in the U.S., domestic and international, like FBI for domestic, which is like your MI5, CIA, which is international, like your MI6, and all the other intelligence agencies like satellite, national reconnaissance offices, etc. All of those 16 different investigative agencies that are in the U.S. system, plus the 17th being the Director of National Intelligence that oversees all those agencies. Those agencies, 45 days after a federal election, must report any information regarding foreign interference in an election to the president and to the heads of the relevant agencies that protect the infrastructure of America, the legal, political, military infrastructure. When we had the election on November 3rd, they were required to give that report on December 18th, 45 days later. The Director of National Intelligence couldn't get the agencies to cooperate with them and finish their reports. And so they didn't give them the report in 45 days. They were in violation of that 45-day requirement. They didn't submit their report until January 19th, 2021, another 33 days later. And the report, even then, was not fully complete, but it did show foreign interference. And with less than a day until Joe Biden was to be sworn as president, there was no time to act. Congress had already made its decision on January 6th. The courts had refused to hear any further on the cases and said they weren't going to see it with Texas and other states bringing suit against the validity of the election, and other states where there had been corruption in other states that affected the whole national. Imagine you're Texas and your state did the vote right. Texas said, we won't use Dominion vote machines because they're corrupt, crooked, they're used to violate the vote. But other states like Arizona said, no, we're going to use them. And then the vote was corrupted. So Texas saying, well, that's not fair. You can't do that. You can't run a crooked election just to get an outcome you want by a couple of politicians. It's not fair to your people there, and it's not fair to us here. The court said, no, you don't have standing. Just leave it alone. And all these states that backed Texas, which there was a large number of states, said, yeah, we want to back up Texas on this, and we don't want to have a corrupt vote. And the court said, no, you don't have standing. We're just going to let it pass. And so the vote was allowed to proceed. With all that knowledge, when you got to January 20th and the Joe Biden was sworn in as president of the United States, that's the instant where the military was required to hand the nuclear arsenal keys over and command and control over to Joe Biden. And to, more importantly, it's not even just one person. The president is a whole group of people. It's a kind of a club. And so when you elect a president, you really elect a body of people that come with him. And so the military said at that instant that they're sworn to protect the Constitution, which is the contract between the American people and its government. They're sworn to protect the Constitution and the Republic, which is the Union of States. When they detected that they were supposed to hand over nuclear forces command and control to someone that had not been properly vetted, where there was questions on the certification, a captured person or group that was under the influence, foreign influence, that was not validly legally elected, even if a corrupt Congress and courts said, yeah, the military's protocols are slightly different. They then began a review internally, not just of the Director of National Intelligence report, but of military intelligence assets that are separate from those other investigative agencies. Because the military agencies, while they had a part in that national intelligence assessment for the Director of National Intelligence, they still are separate. They began their independent evaluation, and they did not hand over control of the nuclear football. Now, there's a little bit of an issue there because the football can be in proximity to the president. But remember, it's just a handshake. Joe Biden can take his Toys R Us Play plastic keys, color-coded, yellow and green and blue, and he can stick it in the briefcase, and he can turn the knob, and he can put his eyeball up to the thing, and he can push all the buttons in the code. It still goes to a general in a remote location, who then has to decide if that's a valid order, if that makes sense, and he can choose to go or no go. The president actually isn't in physical control of that. None of the Biden people have been allowed into Cheyenne Mountain. Mountain's still locked up tight as a drum since March of 2020, when President Trump had it sealed up because of the COVID thing. It's still locked up. The teams that rotate in and out are not, none of the Biden people are being allowed in there, and certain functions of the government over at the Pentagon are not allowing that Biden people to be inside of their offices and their operations. So you have a decision on the part of persons in the military in command of nuclear forces, not all of the military, just those that have the instant button, and they're saying we don't recognize that Biden won the election legitimately, and therefore we are not recognizing him as commander-in-chief of military forces, and specifically the nuclear forces. And then here's let me just bore in just a little bit further. And I apologize because I'm not letting you do a good interview, but if I give you this basis, then we can probably have a better interview with the rest of it. So I apologize to your listeners and to you, but I'm not trying to over-dominate. I'm just laying a framework that'll allow us to have a great interview from here on. The last part of this whole equation is that the nuclear forces, that's the backbone. That's the last line of defense for the American people to protect against enemies. It's the most, powerful about the screening for people to get into that area of our military, etc., is the very hardest, of course. And the protocols that are written are very precise, very exacting. They did, in fact, do their own investigation using those investigative tools. My contention for your listeners, and what I've been saying for a very long time now, is that once they realize that the way the military code is written, the way it says they're there to protect the Constitution, the contract with the American people, and the Republic, the Union of States. Once those are secured, once that the country is safe, there's no missiles flying instantly, we're not under some instantaneous attack that they have to respond to, then the code is written. It says that as quickly, as safely and reasonably possible, that the military must restore lawful civilian authority to the command and control of the military, the commander-in-chief position. So in other words, it's not generals running America's military, that it's a lawfully elected civilian authority, a representative of the people elected to that position, who is then protecting America as the commander-in-chief, recognized by military forces as the elected representative of the people, commanding U.S. military forces. That's a huge, important distinction. With that as their guide, then the generals, if you will, not running America, they have to find a way to get an elected leader back in position. Now, if the election was corrupted, the question is, if the egg is scrambled, can it be unscrambled? In this case, we do have the electronic forensic data. We do have the ballots there. We're in the middle of a recount in Arizona. We actually have the electronic communications of the people that were manipulating the vote machines. We know the exact route that it went and who the people were at those locations that were involved in the corruption of the vote. Mm-hmm. So we actually do know beyond any reasonable doubt that Donald Trump, President Trump, won the election on the vote totals clearly, without any question. So the military then, if you said, well, we've got to have a revote, we've got to have a re-election, or say you got to do it in certain states where it was horribly scrambled. Well, if you actually know what the numbers were, it would be a crime, an additional crime, to put the country through a revote to start all over. It would be a trauma to the country, and you might get further fraud. If you actually do know what the numbers are, then the military would read in the duly elected representative of the people, bring him up to speed. That's not a public thing. And the military does not recognize him or direct that he is the president of the United States. That is an executive position. That's one side of the map. They recognize him as commander-in-chief of nuclear forces, military forces, and they read him in. We recognize you won the election. We recognize you as the commander-in-chief. Then they read him in, and that's not a public thing. It could be, but if you're under ongoing attack, which the attack on our election process was a digital Pearl Harbor, a digital attack, war by another means, to take over control of the country. So the military reads in the civilian elected authority as commander-in-chief of all military forces, starting with the nuclear. The commander-in-chief, once he's briefed, brought up to speed, then makes the decisions as to how to proceed. If there's an ongoing threat, which there is, we're under the COVID, we got all sorts of threats to the economy, financial, etc. Mm-hmm. I apologize. That was a call that came in. Okay. We have all these threats against us. If there's ongoing threats, then the military has to advise the president. The president then decides what's the right actions next. And if you have treason, if you have collusion of some of the elected official or courts, if there's somehow compromise, being blackmailed, etc., honeypotted like Epstein Island, things like that, then the military advises the commander-in-chief, and then the commander-in-chief decides the next actions. Maybe they advise him, we suspect this, we suspect that, and the commander-in-chief says, well, I need more information, I need more data, I need more, we need to move on a particular threat in a certain way. And so working through all of that, it may be a process, and it would be my contention to you and your listeners, there's a process here where the public is unaware, but within the relevant parts of the military, they have recognized that Trump is the elected president of the United States, but for their purposes are only recognizing him as the commander-in-chief, and now it's up to the commander-in-chief to decide next actions, which will be based out of military responses. The military will follow the president's orders in order to retake the Hill, the Congressional Hill, the Judicial Hill, the federal operation from an administrative side of the U.S. government. So my way of saying that shorthand is we have a dual presidency in America right now. We have the congressionally recognized and judicially recognized president of the United States, and we have the military's recognized commander-in-chief. And the only caveat I add to that, the asterisk that I add to that statement, is a president, even when he leaves office, is still referred to as president. He isn't even given a distinction of former president or whatever is the president. So President Trump will always be a President Trump. But at this exact moment, is President Trump operating specifically as commander-in-chief covertly of U.S. forces, including the nuclear. And Biden and his team are being recognized by Congress and the courts as the executive side administrator, but he is not being given the commander-in-chief role. Now, last thing, let me just add this one PS for your listeners, and then we'll have a conversation. President Biden has traveled numerous times on aircraft, going all over the place. When he came to Washington, D.C., normally, as a courtesy, a military aircraft would be sent to where he was coming from, which was Delaware, and come down to the inauguration ceremony and run through the whole process. They give him the keys to the helicopter and the limo and the jet, and he's commander-in-chief. A private jet had to fly Joe Biden to Washington, D.C. Joe Biden has gotten aircraft numerous times, and in the air traffic control system, the aircraft he was flying on was not designated as Air Force One, which is a military designation. It's not an FAA civilian aeronautics designation. It's a military designation, and military controllers inside the air traffic control system control airspace around that aircraft. Joe Biden could be riding on a kite behind a boat being towed around having fun, and it would be Air Force One. He could be flying a hang glider. It'd be Air Force One. He's not riding an aircraft designated Air Force One because that component of the military is not recognized as president. Additionally, I can tell you from firsthand knowledge that over at Palm Beach, Mar-a-Lago, and like that, the Secret Service detail that was assigned to President Trump while he was president, and being friends with families of former presidents, when the president steps down as the president of the United States and a new president's installed, the security details transfer to the new president, and they stop guarding family members and things like that. They pull all their electronics out and everything else and go back home. When President Trump went down to Mar-a-Lago, the securities detail, the Secret Service security detail, didn't change. And the protocols didn't change. The people at the airports, the people within the policing services were specifically told that nothing was going to change in their security protocols when the January 20th step down of President Trump occurred. The military maintained that authority over protecting President Trump and there was no change in those security details, etc. Joe Biden, on the other hand, for example, he goes to go get on an airplane, and many people have seen the video where he's tripping up the stairs 3 times, going into Air Force One. So what happens 4 days later? He can't even walk up the stairs unassisted, going on the airplane without tripping. 4 days later, he shows up at another airplane, and he's carrying his own suitcase. He's carrying his own umbrella, and he's walking up the steps. He can barely walk up the steps with nothing in his hands. Now, to show how tough and strong and virulent he is, he's carrying his own suitcase to make a demonstration of he's okay. Biden, he goes out and rides horses bareback, and he's, wrestling bears and, alligators and everything else. So they decided they're going to have Biden, going to do something similar. He's wrestling a suitcase. It's comical. Why? Because you would never, ever allow a head of state to have to carry his own luggage, his own umbrella. It's a safety protocol, because if there's an attack, if something happens, you want him to be able to dodge and dive and to have flexibility and mobility, besides the embarrassment of carrying your own luggage. He was going out to his limo the other day, and the guy that's escorting him is wearing brown Walmart shoes, all scuffed up. Nobody gets around the president. They don't have spit and polish on their shoes. He's the head of state. Mm-hmm. You got other guys wearing their blue jeans, standing there like they're guarding him going on the airplane. They had the Beast, the armored car, and there's no doorman manning the door to let the president in. He gets all the way up to the door, and there's nobody got the door open. Why? It's a safety issue. Remember when Reagan got shot? The door was already open on the limo. These are standard security protocols known by every government protecting a head of state on planet Earth, and the president of the United States isn't getting the same protocols. What the hell's going on here? It's because in those areas, a show is happening, and they're not saying it, but the military has not signed off on Joe Biden being the lawfully elected leader of the Western world from a commander-in-chief position. And they're pantsing these people, are literally pulling their pants down in plain sight to show you that they're not going along with it. Kamala Harris and Joe Biden got on the same aircraft together a couple weeks ago. That doesn't happen. You don't put both the executives on the same aircraft. In case of emergency, you don't get a decapitation of government. It's insane. You would never do that. Why are they doing that? They're being exposed. The king and queen have no clothes. And so this is playing out in plain sight while behind the scenes this war is happening. And you do have a dual presidency situation that's playing out for the whole world. And that's why, for example, one last thing, and I say that over and over, but I want to get these little details out. You had Strategic Air Command that handles nuclear forces here in the United States from the air side. Strategic Air Command put out a note the other day that said, do not expect a linear response if an enemy is doing something and you can't protect it through normal forces. A tactical nuclear weapon could very easily be chosen in a crisis if an enemy thinks that that's the only option to preserve their position. Everybody thought it was a warning that Russia might do something with the tactical nuke over in Ukraine because they're building up forces there. The other way of seeing it, and it's interesting, is that if some enemy, be it Putin or somebody else, believed that we were incapacitated because of our situation here in the United States, with the presidency being a weakened position and the military being divided on who's in control, that we were unable to act, and so they could do some type of mischief in the Ukraine with an invasion, and the U.S. would be unable to do a thing about it, or some mischief by Iran in the Mideast or something. The way to read that is you have nuclear forces that are under the command and control of the commander-in-chief. If the only way to play this game at some critical moment is using a limited tactical, which is a very small type of nuclear device, within a small area, use that to protect our position, that's exactly what we'd do. And we wouldn't think twice about it. With low-yield nuclear weapons, it probably does become a little bit more possible, let's say. Within a very short time, the Russians were pulling back their forces, backing down, and saying it was a training exercise. They'd been building up. It was bigger than the 2014 buildup. So we're telling our enemies, don't think you're going to take advantage of this situation at this time. Just because to all the world it looks like we don't have a clue what's going on. We're going 5 different directions, and we're incapacitated or decapitated by this election fraud. You better think twice. And it was a stern warning. So all of that, and I apologize, I know I droned on, but I think I laid the basis why we're where we're at, how we see it, what this all involves. And so now you can pepper me with all the questions that I've raised.
Thank you.
And I really appreciate your patience when I do that.
No, Juan, thank you so much for explaining that. That's amazing. And even in 2014, Kim Clement did say that there will be a duo presidency, which we understand that, Biden has taken some roles illegitimately as a president, but Trump, what I understand, remains as the commander-in-chief. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean, that would be my contention, that what you're actually seeing technically is that where it counts within the military, they've recognized that President Trump is their commander-in-chief, that he is the lawfully elected representative of the people. And in order to protect the Constitution, the contract with the American citizens, the only option is that military forces defer to the lawfully elected president, not the fraudulently certified president that a crooked Congress and a captured court have put in there, that an enemy has installed over the American people. And this is the beginning phases, and you're going to see it develop out through the summer and the fall. It's not going to be instantaneous. This is a war to recapture the Hill, the administrative side of the U.S. government, where a enemy has put their own forces in control over the administrative side of the U.S. government.
Well, we're actually seeing the military, take down politicians, arrest them for election fraud in Chad, in Africa, and also in Myanmar and other places around the world that we probably haven't heard yet. And then we've seen a military ship where the Evergreen ship is as well. So is this all happening because Trump set the stage in his first term when he got all the countries to capitulate to him?
Let me think if I understand the question. Say it one more time. I want to give you precise answers, so I apologize. Sure. I'm trying to think how to answer that precisely.
So basically, we're seeing the military, make arrests of politicians for election fraud in Africa and Myanmar, and probably other countries too that we haven't heard.
Oh, absolutely.
And then we also see the military ship where the Evergreen ship is, because when you go on the live map, you can click on these ships and you can see them pop up and read about them. Now, is this happening because in Trump's first term, he set the stage when he had all the countries capitulate to him. Is this why we are seeing this happening right now?
Well, okay, let me just say this. I don't think it's so much that they capitulated to Trump. There are factions inside of all of those governments that are captured, just like the election side of the US government was captured via this vote fraud. So specifically in Myanmar, the contention of the military leaders there is that there was a fraudulent vote. It put people into office on the civilian side that were literally agents of foreign governments or internationalist groups, these globalist organizations that almost in a James Bond type of a scenario, a Spectre type of a group that is gaining control of the inner workings of governments around the world to do their bidding. So Myanmar, for example, said, no, we're not going to go with this fraudulent vote. We're going to take control of our government. We're going to arrest people where we have data of their corruption, the fact that they are agents of these foreign interests. You know, you can have foreign interests that aren't other governments. You have foreign interests that are, large businesses that want to run in your country a certain way because it makes financial sense for them. Essentially enslaving the people and using them as a tool of, for their own mischief around the world. And so, I mean, again, why would you want to capture the presidency of the United States? Because the president of the United States wields a lot of financial power, and he also wields military power. If he's got the role of commander-in-chief, he can send forces to start or stop a war, deploy ships, etc., and control other countries. So if you're a globalist, you want that guy doing your bidding so you can, further capture the world, if you will. And if you can't do the whole world, you can do it a piece at a time, like a monopoly board with countries like Myanmar and other African countries. I had a businessman from a certain country that flew in because I was in D.C. here several weeks back, and we met there at the Trump a couple of times. And he's, his aide and I spent quite a bit of time working through some issues. He's worth many, many, many billions of dollars. And they got out of a certain African country by the skin of their teeth, had to hold an aircraft on the ground for several hours, commercial aircraft, till they could get them there because there was a bunch of rioting going on and there was a civil disturbance. This businessman was trying to complete a deal for a large mining operation where they had ongoing mining stuff. He owns all the mines in this area and has for a very long time, but they were trying to complete a deal. That's why it was there, that would have brought a lot of wealth to that region and that particular political group that was in power there, and would have provided a lot of jobs. It's still going to, I think. And it would make one particular political group stronger than some of the other groups. These other groups, including primarily a group run by George Soros, didn't like that. So they incited these riots to try and cause civil disruption, including to disrupt this operation, getting this mining deal going. And the reason is because that would mean that then the money wouldn't flow to the people and to that associates of that political party. And that would be weakening and would make it better for the Soros side people and others. So there was a very specific economic reason why these riots were being incited. I would take that to a bigger scale here in the United States. If America is weakened, incapacitated on its ability to do business, because the business of America, as President Reagan said, the business of America is business. We do stuff. Mm-hmm. If you mess it up so we can't do business, that means the business happens somewhere else in the world. It's advantageous to people that conduct their business other places. I'll use one that's a very big example: oil. Under President Trump loosened the restrictions on drilling on federal property and made it possible for us to go get oil that's sitting right there under our feet. We didn't have to get oil out of Saudi Arabia. We didn't have to get oil from other places in the world. And so everybody said that America's oil is almost gone, that we're done. We can't, we're going to have to go other places, get other energy. President Trump said, no, I'm just going to change the restrictions. Within 3 years, we're a net exporter of oil. People said it was impossible. We weren't dependent on Mideast oil. We didn't have to send our troops all over the world to protect the free flow of oil. We got our own oil and we'll ship it out from the US. So we became very prosperous in only a couple of years exporting oil to the world. When Joe Biden came into office, one of his executive orders under the auspices of an emergency was to close all federal lands to drilling, no new permits. So all of a sudden, now we're getting into another oil crisis because now we got to import oil from other parts of the world. But in the case of Saudi Arabia, for example, Saudi Arabia has doubled down and tripled down on its export of oil of all places to China. So now the oil isn't available for us here that we take out of Saudi Arabia. And we have a refinery issue too, by the way. And so there's a bit of a question, where's the oil come from? And then on top of that, somebody did a little cyber attack on one of our big oil pipelines that's moving oil down from Canada. And next thing you know, we don't have oil for the refineries, and the U.S. is going into a bit of a gas crisis in some areas. It's not everywhere. It's actually relatively limited, but it's a big deal because people get scared and the media says stuff, and then all of a sudden everybody's putting gas in their gas cans, and you got a little bit of a crisis for a while. It's a hyped up thing for the most part. But you see and step back off the whole planet and just look at it at a planetary level. Somebody's trying to manipulate and maneuver the politics in order to suit them where they're at, because maybe they control oil in other places outside the United States, and they're going to get suddenly fat and happy with their oil. The price of oil goes up. It was down. The gas prices at the pump were in the low $2 range down here in Texas where I'm at. I think it paid even like $1.80 or so a gallon here a while back, and one of my Bentleys I was filling up, and it was like $1.80 a gallon. I was going, oh my gosh. And I use a lot of gas. I don't care. But the other side of the coin is now the gas. I just bought gas yesterday, and I think I paid $4.06. So that's a radical jump. And of course, if you think of a whole economy, energy is where everything starts. The fuel to run trucks across the roads, to get goods to market, to have people go to work, and to heat buildings, and to do farming and everything else. If you have high energy prices, it's like a hidden tax bleeding off your wealth, slowing you down, putting a noose on your collar. And then whoever gets that extra revenue gets fabulously wealthy. So those people that want to manipulate the flow of energy and raise or lower energy prices are picking a winner and a loser. And that's to choke down America, to let production and other activities happen in other parts of the world. Well, if you're a globalist, that's probably a great thing, because America is a threat to you. If you're an American, or if you're a person that's trying to do business with America, if America's not working right, it's going to hurt you. So who the leader is that helps to make some of those laws is very relevant. Joe Biden, as a first act as he came into office, changed the way that energy is accessed in America. And over time, it will radically change our efficiency and our incomes here in America and out across the world. President Trump did the opposite and America was beginning to prosper again. And it was all based on energy, and it's all based off of executive orders. And whoever controls, gets put into office as president, actually remote controls the fate of nations.
Absolutely. Well, it's very important that Trump does come back eventually. Hopefully, just like we're seeing these arrests on the other side of the world, it would soon come to America, and then Joe Biden will be removed. So on January the 5th, Donald J. Trump signed into law to investigate pandemic scams. We haven't seen this law being used yet, unless it has been used behind the scenes and we're unaware of it. But why has he signed this into law, but we haven't seen anything happen with this piece of law?
Well, again, for the moment, because we're under a digital attack, with a digital Pearl Harbor, just like any emergency room situation, you will have triage that has to happen, where you have to pick the most important things. Is the broken bone more important, or the fact that you have an artery bleeding out? Which do you deal with first? And if the broken bone is in proximity to an artery, maybe you have to deal with both of them a little bit at the same time, but there still is, procedures that have to be done, protocols to save the life. And maybe before you even, even though you're closing off an artery, you've got to get fluids into the person to keep them going, saline and other things. So the triage, it isn't pretty, it isn't fun. And you may even have a patient that's, not sedated in any way. They're in intense pain, but you almost have to tune that out while you deal with the problem to save the life. And you'll come back and deal with the rest of us later. It's not pretty to watch. It's not easy to watch, but that's why a trauma physician is probably the most difficult job to do and to learn. And so you have to kind of take a deep breath and understand that the people that are making these decisions and the procedures that they follow in the course of doing what they do, while it's not easy, we have to have a lot of respect and not second guess too much decisions that they make. That we may say, no, give them sedation, don't let them be in pain, stop the pain. Well, that might be a death sentence for the patient. The doctor has been trained, is going at it in a particular sequence based on which things are the greatest instant threat to life, and which things you can come back and deal with later that will have to be dealt with, but have to be done in a particular sequence.
Absolutely.
Does that answer it for you? That makes sense?
Absolutely. You're saying that there's priorities. The election fraud is number one priority, which it makes perfect sense. And then once that's been dealt with, then we will go back to that law that was signed in for investigating pandemic scams. And then hopefully the whole thing will come out. So the other thing I wanted to ask you moving on is in respect to the quantum financial system, do you believe that this will be something that will replace the monetary system? Do you think that there is there any evidence or proof for the quantum financial system?
Yes. My main concern is that people are misunderstanding what that's all about. The intent on the part of these people that have put things in play was that they were going to create a scenario where, with collapse of paper currencies, of the dollar, pound, mark, yen, bola, that the economies for some type of security would go to these blockchain currencies. Now, the part that most people within our audience have not fully understood or would even disagree vehemently with. I have these conversations all the time. I've had them just over the last day or two down here in Texas with a number of people who have very heavy positions in the cryptos. And what I have to remind them, and I'm very familiar with this turf, you're not going to get people that are going to be able on the details to say they've got me beat. The fact of the matter is, in looking at how to take down an economy, remember, the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. We won World War III. This is World War IV that we're in right now. It's a digital war. World War III was won, and the last phase of that war with the Soviet Union under the Reagan administration and finalized during the Bush administration, Bush won. We fought them in an energy war. We had the cost of energy drop so low, the cost of oil dropped so low. Russia's primary income was via oil, natural gas in that era from the 60s, 70s, 80s. And they were drilling all over the place. Companies were coming in from all over the world, drilling there, and they're going to make all this fat money. Then what happened was that the energy cost was driven down by President Reagan and the team around him early on with cooperation from the Saudis, because we arm twisted them. And when the price of energy came too low, literally across Russia, oil drilling operations, huge projects where huge, vast amounts of money had been invested already, wells that were 80% completed. The cost of oil went so low that they just walked away and left all of the equipment to rust in the field. It wasn't even worth pulling it out, lifting it off, bringing it back, selling it somewhere else. The price of energy went so low that here in the United States, we nearly wiped out Texas because all of the independents and small producers, there wasn't enough energy to maintain their operations. And so we started out not just the Soviet Union, but some of our own people with high production of oil out of Saudi Arabia. So we did energy as part of this war against the Soviet Union to fight a war by other means, taking armies. It was an energy war to begin with. Then we did a religious war with Russia, the Soviet Union. That's when the Pope went over, Lech Walesa in Poland, all of those dramas there with the trade unions. But the reality is that was all a religious war, more even than it was a war inside the trade unions. And in fact, I just had a friend out of New York came down and visited me in Palm Beach here a couple of weeks ago, and she's actually moving down there, a doctor. She grew up in Poland during all those times. And the thing that she reiterated to me again is this was a religious war in the satellite countries around the Soviet Union, pushing back against this authoritarian regime controls. Picking who your minister could be at your church, state-approved churches and ministers. Teaching you about God because they're state approved to teach about, religion. So the third leg on that, we had SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative, and we got in an arms race with Russia. The contention from the Reagan administration side was that we had the machinery, the factories, the production personnel to out-manufacture the Soviet Union. And we did. Greater technology, greater depth within our industrial capacity. We weren't just playing patty cakes with them. That was why President Reagan announced Strategic Defense Initiative, which people commonly refer to as Star Wars. Dr. Teller came to President Reagan, gave him the proposal: we can intercept missiles, we can create a technology to defeat missiles in the lift phase, in the boost phase coming off the Earth, in the coast phase going through low Earth orbit, and then the reentry phase, 3 different sections of a rocket's flight. That's what forced them over these last decade or so to come up with means to fly slower with hypersonic missiles and to have maneuverability so they couldn't be easily intercepted. It changed, as an arms race, but we outran them. And excuse me, while Russia and his people still exist, the Soviet Union, which was the government running Russia at the time, does not exist. They collapsed. The last phase in that collapsing process was taking out the currency, the ruble. And during all of that time, the ruble was only allowed to be traded inside the country. When Gorbachev came to Reykjavik to meet with President Reagan to come up with a arms control treaty and to, come up with some glasnost stuff for economic cooperation, Gorbachev changed the rules there at that meeting. Reagan was told that they were going to have a certain agreement, everything was already decided, they're going to have this fireside chat, everybody's going to go home happy. At the last second, that was changed, and Gorbachev didn't do what he said he was going to do, thought he was going to snooker Reagan. Reagan came back from that meeting very annoyed and signed an executive finding. And that finding said that if a country's laws say that it's illegal to take their currency and trade it outside of their borders, does that restrict countries or governments from outside the border or businesses from buying that currency if it shows up outside the border? And the finding was legally that that's a law within that country. They can regulate the flow of currency within the country, but they don't make a law in this specific example, reading between the lines, the way these types of things are done. This executive finding was done. They can't make a law inside the Soviet Union that we have to obey in the United States. It's not a treaty. It's not a mutually agreed upon law. It's their own law. So if rubles show up outside the Soviet Union, well, we're not restricted from trading them. It's their business to make sure the rubles don't get out of the country. So we created a market for rubles outside the Soviet Union, that we would buy rubles through various entities, and we would give dollars, yen, bola, marks, relatively hard currencies, stable currencies, in exchange for rubles. And you have to kind of picture in your mind, it's just paper. It's just paper. But our paper is worth more than their paper, and the people wanted our paper. So if some generals, all the buddies around Yeltsin and later the Gorbachev people were crooked too, if some of those guys were able to get the printing presses rolling and making more yen, if the mobsters inside the Soviet Union are able to get yen outside the country, the political mobsters, the military mobsters are able to get rubles outside the country, well, we'll buy them. And we did. We didn't just buy a little bit. We bought billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of rubles. So many rubles that we had to come up with ways to get paper to them so they could print more rubles legally. It wasn't counterfeit rubles. It was rubles that were printed on state-owned and operated presses that corrupt people inside the Soviet system used those printing presses, printed all their rubles up and exported them out of the country. Well, we bought them. And then at a certain point, as Reagan left office, we slowed down the buying and then stopped it. And all we would do is trade rubles back to them as their economy. We had a drug addict essentially looking for Western money. And so we'd give a little bit of Western money. We give a bunch of rubles back. Well, what happened then was that the rubles came back home inside the Soviet system, but they were being flooded with rubles, and that destabilized the value of the rubles. Why? Because it's a supply and demand system. So suddenly they had more rubles than people wanted. People didn't want the ruble. They wanted hard Western currencies. Why? Because they could take those currencies and buy things outside the country with them. Cars, Mercedes, Ferraris, dresses for their girlfriends, whatever they wanted. And so they became addicted to hard Western currencies in this glass-nosed environment. Right. And so as that happened, the economy went into an inflationary spiral. And so the value of the ruble dropped by 40% in a matter of months on the black market. It went from at the very height, when it finally collapsed, it was initially trading at about 40 rubles to the dollar. At the end, at the day that the wall came down in Germany, the ruble was trading at 200 rubles to the dollar and was dropping like a rock. And so Gorbachev called President Bush and said, "Hey, we need some help here." And Bush said to Gorbachev, "Well, I see the wall is still up. It's still manned. I don't think I can help you while the wall is still manned, because you talk about opening up and glasnost. We're all going to be happy and cooperative, but you're still, locking your own people in. That's not free trade." Mm-hmm. And so Gorbachev, within the same hour as he talked to President Bush, went through the command structure, had the guards walk away from the wall in Germany and return home. Literally just took their guns or munitions, everything else, and walked away. And of course, famously, then we saw the wall being beaten down by German people from both sides. And over the next many, many months or a year or two, you had a revolution inside Russia, and the Soviet system was dismantled, and then new leaders were put in place. Of course, now we see Putin and like that. Russia survived, but the political system didn't. Now, all of that long conversation to come back to cryptos. The issue is when you destroy a currency, something else comes in to replace it. Now, the ruble came back, was restabilized. It went through a lot of trauma. You still have the ruble, and the economy came back. You took out the political system. You didn't take out the currency, but the trauma of the currency and the multiple attacks on the energy that gave the currency value, that made the economy go, the military with SDI and trying to build all this military. Afghanistan was also in the background where they had to have a huge military expense. So we were fighting them there. I was just with Joanne King here in Texas, had a beautiful time with her over the last few days. And she's the one that in the movie Charlie Wilson's War was the one that kept going to Charlie Wilson, the congressman from Texas, to try to get money for the Afghan rebels to push back against the Russian occupation in Afghanistan. And she helped us tremendously to get that done and get that over there, to push back in the Soviet Union as part of the pushback on Soviet expansion to get a warm water port. So with all of that said, now you look at the current situation for America and the world. The world is under attack. It's under attack on its paper currencies and what they're trying to substitute in the place. Whereas we were substituting hard currencies, marks, yen, bola, and dollars against the ruble and destabilizing their currency. In this case, the currency that's being sent in to undermine the Western paper currencies, not just the dollar, but primarily the dollar, are cryptos. And the inflation is going into the cryptos. When suddenly the people decide that that's the more valuable currency, all of a sudden the cryptos could wipe out the dollar, could wipe out these other currencies. If it was allowed to go its course, who was doing that? These globalists, and who run these intelligence agencies like their own private security agencies, are behind the crypto revolution. That's why Satoshi's not a real person. He's a fabricated person. Mm-hmm. Who controls the most advanced computers on the planet? Who has the most advanced computers on the planet? The intelligence agencies. So let me just propose to you, just like Facebook, Zuckerberg didn't invent Facebook. Facebook was developed in a DARPA Operation Defense Advanced Research Project inside of our military procurement system and development system in the U.S. Inside that operation, the Facebook model was developed. On the day that that program ended inside of our militarized, system, DARPA, at the same time, on the same day, one stops at 11:59 at noon. Facebook is established, incorporated, and all of that material was handed over to Facebook. Zuckerberg didn't invent Facebook.
Yes,
he was just the designated winner face who got to receive it. Because he's one of the bloodline family people. He's a hidden bloodline family member, royal, and then becomes fabulously wealthy. When he became so wealthy and when Facebook became so prosperous that it had so much money, at a certain point they decided, well, we need some of this money for other activities. Now I'm getting to the cryptos. You got to listen very closely here. At a certain point, they decided that they wanted to bleed some of that money off for other operations because it was fabulously wealthy. It's like in cards, you're playing 21 and all of a sudden you get dealt a couple of kings. Well, you'll say, well, I have a high likelihood of winning on the king, getting another face card and like that. So I'm going to double down. I'll split my kings. Maybe you get another king down. You split that again. And now your likelihood of winning overall in the hand goes up radically. So what happened with Facebook? They got all this money. They want to bleed some off. They come up with this ruse that the Winklevoss twins somehow also created Facebook. Well, if Zuckerberg didn't create it, neither did these guys. But they decide that they're going to have a little friendly lawsuit, and they bleed more funds off of Facebook into these guys. So these twins go off, and what do they invest their first money in? Mm-hmm. They invested in cryptos, into Bitcoin and other stuff. And they developed this mining empire to go after the crypto market. If it was an intelligence agency operation that created Facebook and then designated who the person's going to be that gets to run Facebook and have all of the money, then the people that they brought in after the fact are also the intelligence agency. And then who has all the computers? Who has the most advanced computers? The intelligence agencies, NSA, the CIA. People talk CIA. Look, CIA only gets about 8% of the intelligence budget for the United States. 84% goes to National Security Agency. And they are vastly, the computer technology and volume is out of this world over there. So who's got the ability to do mining and stuff like that? One of the things that's, by the way, early on in the whole crypto thing with the Bitcoin, famously, a certain person, when Bitcoin was only a few pennies, supposedly had a computer and lost their keys, threw the computer away. lost their digital keys, and the money was, this crypto's lost forever into the digital cyber whatever. And so at the time, it was millions of dollars when, Bitcoin was just a few cents. What do you suppose the likelihood is that somewhere down the road, magically, miraculously, he finds his keys, this person that we don't know who it is. And all of a sudden, as Bitcoin goes to being worth $1 million, he's now a gazillionaire, and he's come back and he found his keys magically in a desk drawer when he was moving, from his garage to some other location. And now he's a gazillionaire, and he'll be in all the papers and press and everything else. This is the way it's done. We are being scammed by world-class scammers who do this for a living and enslave the rest of us, if we're willing and able to be snookered, to be their slaves. And they're doing it with sleight of hand. It's magic. It's wizardry.
What
at our expense.
So are you saying that cryptocurrency is cabal?
Yeah, that was their whole thing.
Right.
1 second. Hey, Jim, the DVD is right there by the chair on the table.
The other question I have, Quan,
and I'll be over a bit. Yeah, sorry about that, and I apologize. That's my buddy Jim Caviezel racing through the room, going to throw some stuff.
Oh, so give him regards.
All right, you want to say something to our Brit friends?
Hey, best to you.
How you doing?
Thanks, Jim. See you in a few minutes.
So Juan, so the QFS, is it a bad thing or is it a good thing? Is it a psyop? I'm confused.
Let me say it this way. Let's. I mean, this is a really important conversation. I want your people to just kind of think this through. So, I think it's worth taking a minute and considering the ramifications of this. The people that came up with this plan, look, blockchain is a legitimate technology. No question about it. But the technology is, what's the value or meaning to this technology? Look, crypto is as ethereal, as vaporous, as non-tangible as paper money or digital money, because reality is the dollar, the pound, all these other currencies, if you have a few tens of billions of dollars of paper dollars, physical paper dollars, it's still only a tiny, tiny fraction of the digital dollars that exist only as dots and tittles on a computer screen. And it's the same with all the currencies. Most people's wealth is denominated in a digital currency in bank accounts and in stock ledgers and things like that are literally just dots and tittles on a computer screen. A crypto is essentially just a variation of that, with blockchain that shows a history and it's mined in a certain way with algorithms. And so there's a history that's there forever, supposedly going back to the blockchain of origins and who's involved and blah, blah, blah. And by the way, anybody that thinks that they're hiding and they can't be found with their crypto, shoot, I got guys working for me that were part of that operation that can tell who came in and when they went out or what the whole thing was. There's no anonymity in there. They did this for a living. They were tracking guys when everybody thought that they had anonymity in the cryptos, knew exactly who it was and where the stuff was coming from and where it was going out at. So it's a lie that you have anonymity with the cryptos. In fact, you have less anonymity. And if you think I'm wrong, well, okay, you watch and see, and we'll find out who's right. I don't need to have the argument. A lot of that stuff is behind classified walls. So the short version is this. It's another form of enslavement, manipulation, regulation, that you're being sold a bill of goods as though it's totally new and unique and different and protected and everything else. It's not. It's the exact opposite. If we switch the world over to the cryptos, and the government's changed the legislation a little bit. It's not that we can't track it. We just can't track it lawfully, legally with certain privacy laws, but they'll change those laws. And then when you transact with your cryptos, governments will be able to decide when you get in, how you get out, what's yours, what isn't, with the flick of a switch. You could lose all of your access to your own currency because you've fallen out of political favor. It could be suddenly taxed outer space and you're toast. So you think you're getting a safer situation. You probably need to read that as, anybody that believes government.
You make a lot of sense, Juan, because a good few years before Trump became president, he had a tweet that he tweeted, and it was to do with crypto. He doesn't like any of the crypto. So what you're saying sounds correct. It sounds like a cabal system, another trap, a new thing to make it sound like it's a new thing and to attract people. But when I remember listening to Donald Trump speaking of the devaluations of currencies and speaking that all currencies should be in level playing field so that people, so that countries could compete fairly. I understand that President Trump wants us to keep our currencies, but they should all be in level playing field. Now, does that mean that the currencies like the weaker currencies who have currency manipulators on, like the Iraqi dinar and the dongs, is Trump's intentions for those to revalue in level playing field and keep?
Okay, this I'm glad you got to this because it's a really important part of this whole conversation. So many people have bought into this reset of the dinar based on monetary law and agreements and things like that. And so in order to do this reset that was promised and pay everybody back, you're going to have to do certain things. That the dinar is going to jump in value, the Zim bond is going to jump in value to pay this off, and that we're planning on doing that. Let me just say it this way. If you look at the details where people were all getting excited, there's these international agreements. And the agreements are in doing this, that if you get this big windfall of money from cashing in your dinar, you have to have a charitable function for some massive percentage of the money that's going to help mankind and do beautiful things and spread fairy dust all over the earth. So it has to be precise. It has to have certain legal qualifiers, etc. So I'm very familiar. Apologize. I'm very familiar with people that went to great trouble to create their charitable institutions and to outline precisely how they're going to help the children here, and they're going to help the veterans there, and they're going to do incredible farming and rail projects and all sorts of things. They spent tons of time how they're going to help humanity. And so 90% of the money is going to go help humanity, and they'll get to keep a little teeny piece. There's so many layers of misunderstanding, disinformation in that. One of them being that they're going to buy all the jets and they're going to buy all the property. They're going to have, habitats and refuge and, child safety and everything else. If you suddenly flood the economy with all these billions and trillions, what's going to happen? It's the same thing as what we did in the Soviet Union. You're going to have inflation. And the inflation is going to be mammoth. The jets aren't going to stay priced at $50 million. All of a sudden, with this competition of everybody showing up at the same time in this theoretical world, the jets would go from 50 million to 5 billion to 500 billion. Let me use an example. I had a friend whose father grew up in Germany after World War I. And he was a young boy. His mother would house German soldiers in their house. His father had died in the First World War, had a farmhouse. And so she would house soldiers and feed them in her house. And the money that she would get from that, kept the kids going and kept the farm going. When the inflation started to hit with the mark, you have to remember that when World War I ended, the mark traded at the same price as the dollar did. You could take a mark, a German mark, and trade it for a US dollar, and they traded on par 1-to-1. That was in 1918. By 1933, the mark had gone down in value to where it took, 1 billion marks to equal $1. Why did that happen? Because the German government was trying to pay back all of its war debt from World War I based on this League of Nations agreement, etc. And so they're, just printing marks to outer space to pay the people like my friend's mom to house German soldiers. The money they were getting wouldn't buy anything. So they print more. They changed the denomination on the mark to higher and higher and higher valuations. And it was a race. And all of a sudden, 1 billion marks to the dollar. Was it going to be a trillion, a quadrillion? Okay. It could have no end. You didn't have enough paper to do it. So my friend and his brother, a certain day, based on something that happened on the radio, the mom says, here, take all the money we have. She takes her laundry basket, puts all the money in the laundry basket, sends her 2 boys to town, little boys. I think my friend was like 7 or 8 at the time. And they run to town, and mom said, just get anything you can, some meat, some pastries, some milk, whatever you can, just go get it with the money. So they run to town. They get there, and there's people everywhere. It's chaos in front of the stores and everything. So they set this basket down in the middle of the street, and the one brother runs over to check and see if there's any meat at the meat shop. And the other brother goes to the other side of the street, checks to see if there's any bread at the bread shop. They turn around and run back and realize somebody had stolen their basket. They dumped all the money out. He guessed it at several billions of dollars, several billions of marks. They dumped it out in the middle of the street and stole his basket. The basket was worth more than all the paper. That's what happens when you have hyperinflation. All of that money that was going back into Russia with the rubles, it was just paper. And it wasn't worth as much. People didn't want to give up their goods for worth less paper. Now you go to a digital world. If you have a sudden flood of crypto paper, of Zimbon paper, of any kind of paper or digital currency trying to compete for goods to get stuff, people go, well, it's changing value so fast. I don't want to take a chance. I'll keep what I have. I'll keep my food. I'll keep my gold bars. I'll keep my car because I don't want to trade for it because tomorrow it'll cost so much more. I'll never be able to get it back. So they don't do the exchange. If you have this sudden surge of all the various types of crypto that they want to put out there, a crypto that favors online betting, a crypto for Walmart, a crypto for Costco, a crypto for Amazon, pretty soon everybody's got their own currencies. It's not regulated by the government. It's not regulated in value. Even here in the United States, a paper currency is actually not constitutional. It was a receipt, the way they started it within the banking system, for gold or silver. But the only money that was actually allowed to be minted by the U.S. government was gold and silver, and that's it. And so that was the only thing considered currency. It had real value. The paper was just a receipt for something with real value. In the crypto world, all the mining, the thing that they're saying is the real value is the work to develop the blockchain and build it out. And so it's still very vaporous. the comparison for this moment, the dollar, people say, well, the dollar doesn't have anything backing it. That when Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard, when earlier it was taken off of the silver certificate back during Kennedy, where a dollar was a receipt for silver certificate, that now the dollar is not backed by anything. That's not true. What the dollar is backed by is energy, and primarily Mideast energy out of Saudi Arabia, where the lowest lift cost for oil is. Trump was moving that back to the U.S., protecting energy production, and the dollar represents oil, for want of a more complex explanation. I've given complex ones in other interviews, but I don't want to bog people down right now. It's an oil-backed dollar right now. That's why where we produce that oil that the world runs on, that energy that the world runs on, because you can switch it from the dollar, from oil to other energy, and that's what we will do, by the way. It still represents something that does work. Oil or energy does work. It builds things. It takes people places. It allows factories to run, farming to be done, etc. So when you trade dollars for oil, the oil represents work. When you trade it for gold or silver are a store of wealth, whereas oil is a means to obtain wealth, to do work. So when you have a crypto and you're doing all this mining, unlike mining for oil, and you end up with something that does work, when you do this mining for a crypto, you've just built out a digital algorithm. But like gold and silver, it neither spins nor toils. It doesn't actually do work. It's just a store of wealth. It's a repository of wealth, just like the building out of the computer systems, the advancing of the computer systems based on Moore's law. It's just a measure or a mark of a build out of this blockchain that, is a security thing. But when it's all done, it doesn't do ongoing work. It's just a measure of work, unlike a store of wealth with gold or silver. It's a measure of work, but it's in the past. It doesn't do anything ongoing. It has no continuing value other than as a ledger, a history of what transpired. Oil or energy products do work on an ongoing future basis, and when they're expended, you've traded the dollars for something that can go build things and do stuff. So my contention is that basing your currency on a ethereal crypto ledger is maybe helps to keep things more organized in an ongoing basis, but is actually a very poor way to denominate your wealth. Neither spins nor toils any more than gold or silver does. At least with gold and silver, you do have a store of wealth. The crypto is not the same, except to a government or legislative regulating agency, because they can take whatever work that you did to their own advantage. It doesn't give advantage to the person holding it, only to the person controlling it. And you won't get to control that. And even though you say it's a distributed control system, no, it's a distributed monitoring system. But the control of that digital value still resides with the governments who want to regulate it and control it. And you do not have independence. You do not have safety. You're at the mercy of whoever's running the politics, locally within your own government or nation, and globally. And that's very scary.
It is, yeah. So what is Trump's intentions exactly? I mean, is the Iraqi dinar and the revaluations of the dong as well, is this all a myth? Is it a real thing? Could it go
Well,
with the dollar?
Let me say it this way. It was the other team's way of enslaving the world. Why would we want to do what the other team wanted to do? They've legislatively, in these global agreements, created this mythos that we all have to go along with it and do what they say. But let's think about within what context? Within a global monetary system, a federal reserve system, a banking system. Those are all banking agreements with international law. And the reality is, President Trump has been saying, well, you know what? Fuck you to the banks in the city of London. We're not going to play your games, and we're not going to be under your control. We're not allowing a private group of financiers, bankers, a group of families who think that they're royalty to control the whole world through these legal mythos, these agreements that they've all mutually signed under some type of a pact that is at the base corrupt. If they have snookered and fooled the governments of the world, if they've sifted in their leaders into positions of authority, just like happened in this last election here in the United States and elections in other places like the Myanmar that you mentioned, where by fraud, by sleight of hand, by deceit, these wizards, these magicians have put their people into positions of control and authority, who then vote laws into place, banking laws, trade laws, union laws, etc., fraudulently through collusion, corruption, blackmail, deception. Are we obligated to obey those laws? If great crime families are able to get their person into power, and then they pass all sorts of laws that favor the crime family, do we have an obligation to stay with that if we discover it? Look, if the bank robbers show up at the bank and they go in, they rob the bank, they get out, and the police are responding, and maybe they get there in time, there's a shootout, but the bank robbers get in the car and get away. Or maybe the police don't arrive in time, the bank robbers got around the corner and they're down the street in the getaway car and they're getting away. Do we turn around and say, oh, darn, we didn't get there in time, we didn't have enough to stop them, and now that they're off the bank property and they're down the street, they're safe. We can't go after them, it's all done. No. We chase them down, we run them down, we corner them, and we get the money back. They don't get to keep it. And we throw them in the slammer. If there's a shootout, well, we're going to bring bigger guns. No matter what, we're not going to stop until we win, because they're robbers, they're thieves, and we're not going to put up with that. And if they hurt somebody in the course of their robbery, we're going to put them to death. So that's just the way it is. That's how governments work. That's what people have, governments that are elected to protect the charity. And so at the end of the day, the whole world, monetary scams, we're going to say no. And that's where President Trump comes in. And by the way, let me make this personal for you there, Britain, and for all those countries that Commonwealth countries. Where did George Soros come from?
From Europe. I think Hungary.
Well, what did he do? Where did he get his big push on the money? What's the big deal? He bet against the British pound. He bet against it, and he made fabulous wealth because he had insider knowledge that nobody acknowledges or accepts. And that insider knowledge helped him to know how to bet against the British pound and other currencies at other times within the Commonwealth system. What was really going on? You had families in the intelligence agencies who were collecting data, mining data, manipulating data to run down these currencies And Soros has been working as a hidden operative of those families within the British intel system, essentially an agent of MI6 and certain of the families. And he's only a figurehead, just like Zuckerberg at Facebook.
Yes.
Zuckerberg didn't invent Facebook. It was a DARPA operation. It was a militarized operation. He was just the figurehead put in that place. George Soros is the same. He's somebody's little tool. And so to all the world, it's Soros, Soros, Soros. It's not Soros.
Mm-hmm.
He's just the figurehead. It's a group behind him, and they have globalist aspirations that are using him to push money all these various places. He's not that smart. Neither's his son.
Even Hillary Clinton looks afraid of Soros. I think he's got more power than her. If I'm not
Well, and again, I would state it slightly differently. It's not Soros. It's the club behind him.
Right.
He is just a figurehead. He's paper thin. Crap, he can be dead for 20 years before anybody'd even realize it because he just uses his name and face. Doesn't matter. It's a machine behind him, and it's being used to push certain agendas in countries all over the world that suit this globalist operation to move the world to a singular control beyond individual nation states, outside of the control of the leaders that we elect in our own nation states. This is a globalist operation. It's like a James Bond movie.
Right.
It's Spectre. It's a hidden hand right there in plain sight. And you think the thumb and fingers, the Soroses, the Zuckerbergs, and all the 50,000 other of them, some bigger, some smaller, are the actual ones doing it. And behind the scenes, it's a Spectre operation manipulating the people of the world through these entities, through these faces, through these elected leaders. And that's what President Trump and the team behind him are coming against. And that's why they hate him so bad.
I just want to go back a little bit to the currencies, and I want to ask you. I wanted a short answer, just to be very clear with the dongs and the dinars and the zims. You know, is it them revaluing in around 1-for-1 level playing field, whichever you want to call it? Is that a true thing? Is it a real thing, or is it a misunderstanding?
Well, again, I didn't really probably finish my explanation, but I need to finish that out just a hair. And that is, when the cashing in of these currencies was supposed to occur, people are going to get notice that there's going to be a window for a certain number of hours. And it's going to be a certain day, and they can come into the bank and they can convert their Zim bonds, their other currencies, to dollars or marks or yens in the banking system. And they're only going to have so long. And in order to do it, they have to present their paperwork showing that they're going to do certain charitable things with most of the money. And then it has to be approved, and there's only so many hours to do it. It's a scam. It's a ruse. It's a Ponzi scheme. Why? Because if you don't know the secret handshake, if you're not best buddies on the inside track, you're going to be a day late and $1 short. You show up, oh, there's a line at the bank, and there's 5 guys already ahead of you from their secret little handshake club. And they're all in there getting it. They're the next Soroses. It's a scam. They'll get it, and then by the time you get to the window, oh, darn. A few will be allowed to suddenly get it just for good optics, so they can give it validity like it was really a legitimate thing. But the reality is, it's a magician's trick. It's not real in the sense that you realize, and you did all this work, you got all prepared, you're going to be there, you've been promised, and you know how to do it, everybody's in agreement. You get there, and the other guy beat you. How did he get there first? How did he know? He just has better intelligence. One of the more famous stories, Lord Rothschild. When Napoleon was having his battle there at Waterloo, and then he sends, word back that, Napoleon is winning. and so all of a sudden all the markets collapse and people are giving their stuff away. And so stocks, as people are just liquidating, get out of the way because things are horrible, whatever. The reality, a day later, find out that Napoleon lost, and all of a sudden things are stabilized. And here he bought everything at nothing. Why? Because he had a false message come through, convinced everybody of its truth, and then people acted on that false information. The next day, when they found out that the reverse had actually happened, Napoleon had lost, all of the stuff jumps in price, but it's too late. They'd already sold their stuff. They did it on bad information. I don't want your friends, your listeners, to operate on bad information. This is a scam. And so you put all this time and effort into it. Yeah, for all the world, there'll be some winners. There'll be Soros betting against the pound. But he had inside help behind the scenes because it was a scam to move money from all across the British Commonwealth into a very small group of hands. And they even justified it within their little cabal because it's going to strengthen their interests in the interests of these Commonwealth family members, citizens, because what George Soros is going to do with the money is going to strengthen the British Commonwealth in the long run in having power to bring about this global operation that they all know they need. So everybody paid a little piece of the pie, and it was done covertly. And why is it done this way? Because nobody had to go to Parliament to get authorization to do this. It's a black budget, just like getting Facebook to control the conversations all around the world and all across the US with their social mandates on what conversations are allowed or not. It's a remote control, black operation, and no government money had to come directly to do it because it was all diverted into private hands. And these secret handshake groups, these globalist groups, are controlling conversations all over the world surreptitiously, so using this means of control.
That's very clear. I had no idea of this, and because I actually have dinar and dongs and stuff like that. So would you advise, or would you suggest that the best thing to invest, including the viewers, if they want to get some stuff, is just to get some silver and gold? Because like you said, that's store wealth.
Well, I would actually have a little bit different way of saying it. Look, the system isn't actually going to collapse. If it does, and now you get silver or gold, what are you going to use it for? You need food then. All you're going to do is trade your silver or gold for food. I just have food in the first place, if I could, that was a little bit storable. In reality, if you're looking for a long play bet, and I wouldn't put all of my eggs in one basket, but you want a big bet, you want a long one. If you think silver and gold were going to stabilize or become more valuable, a mining stock. Look, if you want to go off the grid, you're going to have to, go hide your money in a hole somewhere anyway. Silver or gold is good enough, but the way receipts are and everything, people know you got it. Somebody's going to knock you over the head to go get it. I had a friend in Chile who had quite a bit of wealth in gold and silver. Well, he had people that showed up at his door, took him and his wife and her two daughters prisoner, and were threatening to rape the girls. I think they did rape the mom and like that, but to get him to give up. Like, he had all the silver and gold in a safe somewhere in the house. He didn't have it in the safe. It was all in stocks and bonds. He had a huge control position. It was tens and tens of millions of dollars, but it was all in stock stuff. He had virtually no cash at all. He finally convinced him, let him go to the bank and get some cash out and bought him off with some cash. But the point is that the leveraged position, when he got into that, he came in, I think, with like $7 million in cash. And rather than buy gold, he had moved to Chile from the United States. He bought mining stocks in Argentina and in Chile. And then when the gold went up in price radically, he had the leverage of a mining operation. Instead of seeing his wealth probably would have about tripled in that era on the value of gold. And rather than investing in options which would expire, or in because options are options to buy something for a certain period of time. What if you got your timing wrong and then the option expires before the gold goes up? Or futures, where you're actually gambling on the value, but you have an actual position, but it can go one way or the other. It could really screw you up. So he bought mining stocks in several different mines. A couple of mines did very, very well. I think he was 100 for one on one in just like a year, because when the gold went up in value, then the amount of gold that they had in the ground that had not been pulled out yet was valued with the stock. And so they say, well, this company is only mining so many ounces a year, just pick a number, 50,000 ounces a year or something. But they have in the ground known reserves that amount to, $100 billion. So over time, they could mine all of that. At this price, it's worth this amount. So his value went up radically based on the known reserves and the mineability of those reserves. You can mine the silver, but does it cost more than it's worth to mine the silver? You can mine the gold. Is it accessible? Is it readily mineable? And so some stocks have mines that are better, and some stocks, maybe they have a lot there, but the price of gold or silver has to reach a certain point, and below that price, it's too expensive to mine. But above that price, makes perfect sense. So there's a lot of things go in there. I wouldn't try to if you don't know this market, do it foolishly. But there's plenty of experts out there that actually give pretty good presentations why a mine might have some value. Stick with a couple of the big ones. Don't overthink it, and invest in some mining stock. Right. It might actually be a safer long-term investment than owning gold bars and burying them in the ground. The scriptures talk about the man that he received some certain money from his master who went into another country for a period of time. And these three guys, one got 5 talents, one got 2 talents, and one got 1 talent. So the one with 5 talents went out and bought a piece of property and, makes produce off it and gets money. When the master comes back, he's doubled his money. One with 2 talents had gone out and bought some goods, traded them, improved them, and sold them, and he's able to give back 4 talents. The one with 1 talent took it and buried it in the ground because he didn't want his master to get upset with him, that he would lose the money, that he would go out and gamble at doing something. He's the one that told the other guys, "You're crazy for buying that land. If you go develop that, what if it rains and wipes out the crop and you have nothing? And then the master comes back, you got nothing." The other guy, why would you buy these, jackets or coats or whatever and have embroidery put on them? Nobody likes the colors you chose, whatever. And you could spend that money, you'd have nothing. I'm putting my money in the ground, and when he gets back here, I'll give him his talent back. And the master came back and had favor on the guy with 5 talents who doubled it, the one with 2 talents that doubled it. But with the one with 1 talent, he was pissed off. Why? Because he just buried it in the ground and all he got back was what he had. He says, well, what if you just put it with the bankers and got interest on it? At least I'd have something for, the time. Yeah. If you buy a mining stock, a mining company is doing real work. They're producing something. They're making jobs. They're pulling stuff out of the ground, and they're showing something with it that has real value. You can do it with lots of companies. An oil company is a mining company. In a technical sense, a company that grows food is a mining company. There's mining the earth for minerals, turning it into food. So, rather than just buy gold or silver and hide it, they are a store of wealth. And if you thought the economy was really going to go off the rocks, was going to be horrible, or if you were expecting high inflation, then yeah, I'd go get, personally, if I was buying, I wouldn't buy gold bars, I wouldn't buy loose stuff, I'd buy coinage, silver or gold coinage. So that's what I would do, and then you'd have maybe something that was real money and more tradable, small quantities, etc.
It's spoken a lot about silver and gold, shooting up, especially silver, that it's been suppressed by JP Morgan. Is that something that you're expecting as well? Do you think that, this price of silver will shoot up unprecedented?
Well, I've followed the silver stuff for several decades. In fact, I called the close of the silver gold window several weeks in advance exactly, and years and years and years ago. And because I'm pretty familiar with these markets, it is artificially manipulated and continues to be. That said, it is the most volatile of metals. The highest metal in the Olympic system used to be silver, not gold. So if you won first place, you get a silver medal. It has industrial applications, and the mining of silver has been very thin for quite a long time. The cost to mine the silver is more than what it's been selling for up till recently. Personally, silver coinage minted by governments around the world, whether it be the U.S., the British system, Commonwealth system, some of the South American countries, I think that the silver coinage is the most valuable way if you were going to invest in silver to invest. And I would do it not for numismatic or collector value. I would do it literally just the cheapest coins you can get. I don't care if they're a little bunged up or whatever, what we would call bag silver, and throw it in the corner, and that's your insurance policy. People buy insurance in case of the unexpected. Okay, well, get some silver coin, a few of them, whatever your situation allows, and throw them in some dark corner and forget you got them. And if things really go off the rails, well, you got it. If you're actually trying to invest longer term, go to something that's a mining stock or something like that. If the countries aren't going to go away, just like Russia. Mm-hmm. Russia didn't go away. It's still here. The Soviet Union collapsed. Their governmental system collapsed. But the people are still there. We're going to go through trauma, even with America. Some aspect of what the government system looks like with this internal war with a dual presidency is about to change. And we're going to take a lot of people out of power because they're there because of corruption. Yeah. And it's going to be very dramatic. It's going to be very hand-wringing. But take heart. This is going to happen, and we're going to be just fine. And we're going to get this back under control. And it will be traumatizing to much of the world. But you know what? We got this. We're going to do just fine. One more question, then I've got another interview. I've actually got folks out in Nevada that it's very interesting. Several counties in northern Nevada have got controllers that kind of is a county of Nevada. It's the biggest one with the most voters. They had a situation like Maricopa County in Arizona, where they did a very corrupt vote system. And as a result of that, one county decided the fate of the whole state in deciding the electors for the president. Nevada was a similar situation. So we have, I think, 8 counties now where the county managers have come together and said, we will not certify or add our vote to the state vote unless we get assurances from Clark County that their vote count was lawful, legitimate, fair. We're not going to let one county run roughshod over us. And so one of the counties, Langdon County, which is it's the second wealthiest county in the United States, has $200 million sitting in its bank account with nothing to do. And the people in the county, there's only like 2,500 people in the county, second wealthiest in the country, have said, we're not buying into a fraudulent vote. We'll spend every penny in our treasury. We'll actually add more. They're a mining county, by the way. That's where the wealth comes from. So they're requiring that Clark County give them a lawful way of doing the vote that can't be corrupted, and to prove that the vote wasn't corrupted in this 2020 election. And if you don't, the way the state law is written, no state position can be filled unless every single county agrees to it. Those 8 counties, it would only take one, but they've got 8, are saying, we're not going to certify the vote, which means you can't elect a governor. You can't elect a congressman. You can't elect any statewide position unless you can prove that each of the counties provided a lawful, fair vote. And they're requiring that there be a paper ballot, not this electronic ballot, and that the last election be revisited on its legitimacy. And so they're going to throw a real monkey wrench into the system. They're having probably 10,000 people there right now. Yeah, I'm going to do an appearance there also, a live remote, and then a lot of people. I had people in from all over the U.S., politicians and campaign people in Nevada here about a week and a half ago, almost 2 weeks ago, and coordinating this and the attorneys and like that. And so that activity there in Northern Nevada is really the first shot across the bow. I think you're going to see similar pushes across the U.S. Right. And we're going to reverse this unlawful, fraudulent vote out starting at the county level, going back to the federal level, from the people saying, no and hell no, we're not going to do this, and we're not going to let you run roughshod over us. And I don't care if you're a big city or a big county, we're not putting up with it.
Right, Juan, I know you've got to go, so I want to ask you 2 questions, but you can give me the short answers, right? The next question is,
well, I don't know. It's pretty hard for me to give short answers.
I know.
But go ahead.
The debt jubilee, when Trump files a full audit on the Federal Reserve, which has run illegally, is it true, or is it another scam, that all of the debt in the world will reset to zero because of illegal monetary?
Well, that's not quite how it would happen. In fact, that would favor people that had big loans, big companies, big fraudsters, big banks would actually get off the hook. And mom and dad, if I sold a farm, was getting paid on that over 5, 10, 15 years to a big corporation or whatever, you get taken out with them. You take out the little people at the same time. In the scriptural thing, when an enemy came in and sowed weeds in amongst the good seed in the middle of the night, the farmer rancher said, okay, the people wanted to go out and pull up all the weeds. Well, you pull up the weeds, you pull up the good seed with it. And so you're not saving anything. You're destroying the whole thing. Let the weeds and the good seed grow up together, and then we'll separate them at the harvest. And so that you don't destroy the good seed with it. What you're talking about in that type of a reset is just a plowed earth scenario, and you destroy the good with the bad. That doesn't work either. So what we have to do is somewhat more grading. It's tedious, but we will have to separate the wheat from the tares, and it's a mechanical function, and you just got to go through it and decide what are legitimate debts and what are not. So, for example, in any bankruptcy in which Trump was really managing the bankruptcy of the United States, President Trump, that's his role. He had a couple of business bankruptcies. People think, well, he was wiped out. No, he wasn't. They're compartmentalized operations in his overall wealth. And those couple of bankruptcies was a reset. A judge comes in and decides. A lot of times attorneys and, people that have stuff, they have, these hugely inflated losses. A judge comes through and he looks at it and he says, well, look, this is just a fabrication here on the amount of loss you have. The person that put the land up, the person that put the buildings up or the cars or whatever, they are the ones that had real assets, real skin in the game. I'm going to make them whole. And I'm not going to let a bunch of attorneys or fraudsters with all these fabricated and inflated numbers and tax debts and penalties and everything else just bleed this whole thing dry. I'm going to protect the people that had real wealth in this enterprise, get back their real wealth. That's a legitimate, lawful, correct bankruptcy operation with a judge. If you got a corrupt judge, you'll give all the money to the attorneys, and grandma and grandpa lose their land. So we're going to have what amounts to a form of bankruptcy within the banking system to restore the wealth to the original owners, the citizens and other stuff, and to wipe out these fraudsters who've been coming in and bleeding the system dry artificially through these artificial constructs and laws and like that.
Right, I understand. So you're saying that they would pick and choose to see which debt is illegal, and which debt is legal, and obviously the ones that are illegal they would wipe out accordingly.
It's going to be a tedious process. It's not going to be for everybody. Not everybody's going to be happy. It is going to have to be done that way, and no doubt with any kind of legal proceeding, some go better than others, but it's the only way to get as close to right as possible. Just plowing it all under is a further wrong. And also it stops the ship of state. A ship has a minimum steerage speed. So for example, I've got a larger boat. If I cut engines and I'm coasting in the water, I can still steer the ship. Once I get below a certain steerage speed, I can turn the rudder all I want. Nothing's happening because the boat's dead in the water or nearly dead in the water, and there's nothing to steer. I'm just turning the rudder, but nothing's happening because I'm not slicing through the water. We have to maintain a certain momentum in the ship of state. And if you freeze it dead in the water, stop, you're toast, because now you're just at the whim and the will of the wind and the waves and the currents and everything else. You get taken on the rocks, you can get wiped out. So even if we pause engines for a brief period of time or reduce thrust, we still have to have a certain momentum. A lot of the things that have to happen here in the country and in the world are going to amount to stop all engines, but we're still coasting for a period of time. We have to restore engine power before we're put on the reef, on the rocks, put in some peril. Mm-hmm. We can stop things, we can pause things, but we have to get the restart within a certain period of time. And that's exactly what we'll do, and get us back going again without some of these burdens, without some of these crises or catastrophes. We'll deal with the fire in the engine room and get back going.
Right, excellent. Last question, Juan. Do you know for a matter of fact, right, that JFK Jr. is alive?
Enjoy the show.
Okay. Is that the best of the clue you can give us?
We're all the product of a certain era. We grew up in the shadow of these events, and it shaped our lives. All of our thoughts, our functions, form of government have been controlled, manipulated, both from the media and the government with these events. It's called trauma-based programming. It's an MK Ultra program at the global level, at the societal level. And so we are being pushed to operate, maneuver, think in certain ways. We've all grown up in the shadow of these events. And as I said in my book, we are all the kid by the side of the road.
Okay. So
read my book. I think it will help you. I wish, in fact, I've got it so they can get the two books. I don't charge anything extra for shipping to go to anywhere in the world on purpose. I actually pay oftentimes for the books to go other parts of the world because I want the message out there beyond what it even costs me for the book, because I want people to be able to get the chance to read it and understand how we got where we're at, and understand that people are looking for one person as the leader to bring them out of this. The solution isn't one leader. It's not one person. We're the solution. We're all the kids by the side of the road that grew up in the shadow of these events. We are all that person.
Right. Okay. Well, so is he alive, or do you want to wiggle your foot for us?
If you folks are operating correctly, if all of us are operating correctly,
Yes.
we're all that person.
Right. Well,
and that person is, as long as they're in their memory, they're never dead. And by the way, when we're all operating correctly, safety in numbers. It's a shared identity. Let's all share the identity together.
Absolutely. Well, 𝐸₏𝐸₏, thank you very, very much for giving me your time. It's been an honor. I've learned so much from you. I hope the viewers enjoy this. I'm sure they will. And God bless. Thank you.
Hey, keep sending those British cars over here. I'll keep driving them. The only thing we got to do is some of them, I got to change the wiring. I can't handle that Lucas wiring. In fact, we're having some work done on my 58 MG. I've got several Astons, some Bentleys, all convertibles. And I love British cars. In with all of my American stuff. I just want folks to know that there's times I get very animated and pissed off because of some things that are coming out of Britain and the royals and the monetary stuff coming out of the City of London. But I love our British neighbors. That's where our ancestry for much of America is, and out across Europe. This is a joint effort on all of our parts. And I really appreciate getting the chance to talk with them through you and with your listeners. And I appreciate you reaching out for the interview. And I hope people do get some benefit from it. And so thank you.
No, you're very welcome, Juan. Honestly, I really enjoyed our time, and hopefully we can have another one sometime soon.
Of course.
And
yes.
It will be great to keep in touch. And thank you so much. God bless you. Thank you.
All right. All right. God bless all of your folks, your listeners. See you again soon.
Bye-bye.